I've been using the Asus Zephyrus Duo as my daily driver for the past 2 months, and in today's video I'll be detailing my experiences thus far and whether I think it's worth the high price tag. This is the top end model featuring an RTX 3080, 32GB of RAM and a Ryzen 5900HX, which is an 8-core, 16-thread beast. I've included timestamps in the description, so feel free to skip around as it's a long video. This is a follow-up to the first impressions video I did. Let's get into it. Starting with how the laptop looks, it has an understated dark grey finish so it won't stand out too much. There's no RGB on the outside, which fits in really well with the stealth theme Asus were going for. The laptop lid features the ROG logo on a dotted pattern separated by a diagonal line. It weighs 2.5 kilograms, so it's not the lightest laptop out there, and you can't expect it to be given how much hardware is packed into it. The build quality is excellent and there's very little flex, making it a solid piece of kit. As soon as you open the laptop up, the smaller screen lifts up to rest at a comfortable viewing angle. Underneath the smaller screen you'll see the vents for the cooling fans, which I initially believed to be speaker grills. With regards to performance, I'm going to start with the bad and talk about the battery life. With no peripherals connected to the laptop and on power saver mode, a 3-hour runtime is reported. Without doing anything too intensive on the laptop, for example watching YouTube, browsing the web and some light photo editing, I consistently get close to the 3-hour mark. With 2 monitors, a mouse and a keyboard connected to the laptop, I get just under 2 hours of usage before I have to plug it in. This is with the battery mode set to better battery. If you turn on iGPU mode, again with all peripherals disconnected, you'll get about 3.5 hours of runtime before you have to plug in. I didn't run into performance issues with regular use. Again, that includes watching YouTube and general browsing. Compared to running with discrete graphics, you'll get 40 to 45 minutes more runtime. With all of that said, if you're looking to buy this as an on-the-go workstation, then this isn't the laptop for you unless you intend to use it for a couple of hours without power, say on a train journey or something along those lines. I use a laptop every day, and if I open hardware and monitor, I can check details pertaining to the health of the battery. After 2 months of continuous use, that being at least 6 hours per day on average, the wear level fluctuates between 6 and 8%. The wear level will naturally increase over time, and at this percentage it's not a concern. Because of how large the laptop is, it'd be a crime for there not to be a full-sized HDMI port and a full-sized Ethernet port. The downside here is that you only get one HDMI port. There's also a super speed USB type A port at the back with a maximum throughput of 10 gigabits per second. On the right we have a super speed USB-C port which supports DisplayPort and power pass-through. Over the past couple of months I've used this port to connect a multi-port adapter through which I've connected 2 monitors, a mouse, a keyboard, a mouse bungee and an RGB mousepad. This is the multi-port adapter I'm using. It's one from WAVLINK and it is powerful enough to drive 2 4K monitors in addition to the laptop. I did use a different adapter originally, but that limited the resolution on my ultrawide and it quickly ran out of USB ports as I added more peripherals. This one has lots of ports including 2 HDMI, 2 DisplayPort, 6 USB-A ports, an Ethernet port and a headphone and microphone jack. It's powered externally, so it'll help a little bit with battery conservation. If I open the display settings, you can see all 4 monitors connected. I've arranged them so they match the physical layout. There are 2 additional super speed USB type A ports on this side too. I/O on the left consists of a micro SD card reader, the primary charging port and a headphone jack. Another negative about the laptop is the trackpad. It's painful to use both because of how small it is and its unconventional placement. I bought the laptop as a desktop replacement, so I rarely use it outside of this context, making the trackpad less of a hindrance for me. If you envision yourself using the laptop without a mouse on a regular basis, then this will most likely be a pain point for you. The ability to swap between the trackpad and a numpad is nice. It would have been good to see some haptic feedback when in numpad mode, as it can sometimes be difficult to know a button press has registered. The keyboard is okay, it's not mechanical so you won't get the added tactility and your experience will be similar to other laptop keyboards. It's located at the bottom of the laptop and can be a little awkward to use. Thankfully Asus does provide a wrist rest that helps with this. Starting from the right side of the keyboard we have the power button. The next button allows you to toggle between regular arrow key functionality to page up and down mode and vice versa. The up arrow key will change to page up, the down arrow key to page down, the left arrow key to home, and the right arrow key to end. The next button allows you to toggle the smaller screenpad. You can hide the display, turn it off or turn it back on. And finally we have a button to load the Armory Crate software. Along the top we have the usual volume controls. Pressing the function key and F5 will change the performance profile. It'll switch between silent, performance and turbo. F6 is print screen, F7 and F8 change the brightness. F9 sets the projection mode, F10 disables the touchpad, F11 is for sleep mode and F12 is for flight mode. The Screenpad Plus has what I describe as a matte finish. It's pretty anti-reflective and performs well even in a bright room with both artificial and natural light. The Screenpad has a capacitive touchscreen with a resolution of 3840 by 1100. It's only 60Hz, so don't expect it to be as mind-blowing as the main display. Before I get to how well it works as a drawing surface, I want to talk about what features it provides. The first option allows you to adjust the brightness. By default it's set to around 50%. The difference between 0 and 50% is significant, and less so when going from 50 to 100. The second option opens up the app navigator. With this you can move your programs to the Screenpad Plus and vice versa. It doesn't allow you to position the windows, so it's not that useful of a feature in my opinion. Having said that, one way you can move and align windows on the Screenpad Plus is by simply holding and dragging any window you want to move. This will bring up the organizer menu where you can position windows to your liking, or you can drag the window to the Screenpad Plus and that will bring up 3 horizontal bars whereby you can drag the window to either of these bars and it'll snap to the left, middle or right as desired. The third option locks the laptop keyboard, very handy if you're doing any sort of drawing or anything where you don't want keyboard input. The one big disadvantage here is that the numpad or touchpad isn't disabled. You can disable the touchpad in the Armory Create software, but you shouldn't have to take this additional step. The last option on the left part of the menu minimizes or maximizes any open windows. Now for the options on the right. If you find that you need some shortcuts and you have the keyboard disabled because you're using the Screenpad Plus for creative purposes, the quick key option will come in clutch. You can add more shortcuts using the edit button on the right. Make sure you hit the plus button as otherwise it won't save. It's difficult to see, but you can order the shortcuts using the burger icon on the left. The handwriting tool can be used to convert your handwriting to text, but it often misses spaces between words. It should really add a space after you've written something and you've converted it to computer text. It's not something I'd use as it's quite cumbersome. The audio editing and video editing options you see in the control center are task groups I've added to help with my editing workflow. The first one loads Google Drive on Chrome, which is where I store all of the scripts for my videos, and Audacity, which I use for recording my voiceovers. I can edit a task group by right clicking on it and choosing edit. If you try to recapture the frame without choosing the appropriate layout, nothing will happen. I found that you have to reset the frame in order to update the task group. The settings menu allows you to change the brightness, resolution and scaling. You can customize how you interact with the control center. I've enabled the option that allows you to drag and reposition the control center, useful if it's an obstruction in the current position. In window control you can disable the Screenpad Plus organizer. This is a little menu that pops up as you drag a window, allowing you to move and position it on the screenpad. The default Screenpad Plus app size can also be set. You can have the app take up a third, half or all of the space on the screenpad. I want to finish this portion on the usefulness of the touchscreen for drawing or any creative work. Here I have paint.net open and I'm using a cheap pen I bought off Amazon to draw. You can see that there is a tiny bit of input lag. I've never used a tablet for any creative work, so I can't compare it to one. If any of you guys have a tablet, let me know what your experience is like. The Screenpad is an okay drawing tool, but I feel that it's far too narrow in height and resting your hand on the keyboard while drawing is a tad uncomfortable. The main display is IPS, no HDR unfortunately, and has a maximum resolution of 3840 by 2160 and a refresh rate of 120Hz. When it's not plugged in, the display will default to 60Hz, which is fine as you want to extend the runtime. You can stop this behavior by disabling the panel power saver option in the provided Armory Create software. The difference between 60 and 120Hz really is phenomenal. There's a perceptible improvement in the smoothness of animation and in the fluidity of movement. When you compare this to the 60Hz of the Screenpad Plus, especially when you drag windows from the main display to the Screenpad Plus and vice versa, the disparity is even more noticeable. The default picture profile is fine for a mix of content. You can change the picture profile in the Armory Create via the GameVisual menu. I'll demo all of the picture profiles in the next section, so stay tuned. I have no complaints with regards to the colors, contrast and sharpness out of the box. I don't think I'll be calibrating the screen because of how incredible everything looks already. The Armory Create software comes pre-installed on the laptop and you can customize your experience from here. You can quickly load it using the ROG button on the keyboard. On the homepage, there is a useful infographic which represents 5 key areas and how well the laptop is performing at each. These will change depending on the chosen mode. Windows mode will set everything to auto, which is something you may want to do if you find that one or more of the preset modes is causing performance or any other weird issues. When plugged in, the laptop will switch to performance mode, which will remove any restrictions on the CPU and GPU frequencies. It will still prioritize noise reduction in this mode, so the fans won't spin up until you're doing something particularly intensive like gaming or exporting a video. If you want the best performance, set the mode to turbo. The fans will be a lot louder in this mode, so it should really only be used when you're gaming and the temperatures are higher than you'd like. The GPU frequency will hover between the base clock and ROG boost, which is just a fancy name for a higher frequency. For everyday use, performance mode is what the laptop should be in most of the time. Manual mode allows you to set a custom fan curve. You can have the fans spin up to a certain speed when the CPU and or the GPU reaches a certain temperature. This is useful if the preset modes are not providing sufficient cooling, as laptops tend to get quite hot before the fans decide to kick in. From the main dashboard, you'll be able to see the CPU stats, GPU stats, the CPU and GPU fan speeds, and memory and storage information. This is super convenient, and you can have the software open on the Screenpad Plus to keep an eye on things. You can drag and drop to reorder things to your liking. Apart from the hardware information, you can enable and disable certain features of the laptop, including disabling the Windows key, ideal when you're gaming. You can disable the ROG key and thus prevent the Armory crate software from loading via this method. The touchpad can be disabled if you're using the Screenpad Plus for drawing or any other creative process. Next up is the boot up sound. This can be heard whenever you turn on the laptop. Panel overdrive is something you want enabled. In simple terms, this speeds up the time it takes a pixel to change from one color to another to prevent ghosting or a trailing image for fast moving objects. This is the UFO test with panel overdrive on. This is 60 FPS footage slowed down to 30 FPS. If you pay close attention to the left side of the UFO, you'll see some ghosting even with panel overdrive enabled. Now if I turn panel overdrive off and zoom in, the after image is a little more prominent, so it does help at least a little bit. The next option allows you to disable the touch aspect of the Screenpad Plus. I don't foresee any scenarios where I'd need this. Still good to have the option. The panel power saver option will drop the refresh rate to 60 Hz on the main display when the laptop is not plugged in. Useful for conserving battery life and a good option to always have enabled. iGPU mode will only work if you're using the laptop without an external display, as it'll put the RTX 3080 in a low power state mode. Moving on to the next bit in the Armory crate, we have the systems menu. The memory tab is pretty useless as I've never seen any processors in there. The GPU power saving tab shows the processors that are using some portion of the GPU memory. You can't stop individual processors here and I'm not sure why. The lighting menu allows you to choose 12 preset modes. Clicking on an effect will give you one or more customization options. I'll show you an example rather than going through all of them. If I click on the rainbow option, I have the ability to change the direction the light travels and the speed of the transition. At the bottom we have universal brightness control. You can't go really granular with the brightness here, even though one would assume you can with the control being a slider. Design wise, it would have been more apt to have 4 buttons for the different brightness levels. I can't dive into the Aura creator software as I don't have any Asus peripherals. The audio tab I haven't looked into as I don't use the microphone on the laptop. The resource monitor is a graph representation of the GPU, CPU, memory, etc. usage over time. You can record this to a .rml file, which I haven't seen before, and from a quick look online, you need Autodesk software to open it. AuraSync is only relevant if you have Asus peripherals connected to the laptop. The Sync Devices menu allows you to connect the laptop to your Hue lights if you can get it to work. Even though I have a Hue bridge on the same network as a laptop, the software fails to find it. Hitting the button on the Hue bridge and retrying doesn't make a difference, unfortunately. The Aura Effects tab allows a bit more customization for the basic effects. You can apply the effects to the laptop keyboard, but they'd work better if you had accompanying peripherals. In GameVisual, you can change the picture profile from the default to 7 of the presets. You can also fine-tune the color temperature if it doesn't look right in any of the presets. This is what Forza looks like in the default mode. The racing preset visibly brightens the picture and makes it less contrasty. I found that this mode is fine when you're racing at night in a game, otherwise I prefer the default mode. Everything is just more vibrant and visually pleasing on the default mode. The scenery picture profile bumps up the brightness and saturation even more, making the fog on this wallpaper really pop. RTS/RPG adds a bit of blue tint to the picture as demonstrated by the change in this Anno 2070 4K video. I tried this preset across multiple games and there was no other appreciable difference. The FPS profile is a little more saturated than the default profile and less contrasty. Here I have Metro Exodus's opening level and I'm playing on the default picture preset. If I change over to the FPS preset, it doesn't make a massive difference to the picture, if any at all, probably because it's a darker scene. I have Minari playing here, and when I change the preset from default to FPS, the warmer tones of the plants instantly become cooler, as does the shirt Stephen Yeun is wearing. I find that the cinema profile flattens the image a little bit, making the picture look desaturated, doing the opposite of what the description states. The white balance is a bit cooler when compared to the FPS or racing mode. I just prefer a little more pop in the picture, so again this mode doesn't quite do it for me. Eye care makes the picture super yellow, and as a result I never use this picture preset. The vivid picture preset boosts the saturation way up and the contrast is also very high. Perfect if you want everything to pop, but not if you want things to stay true to life. The look of the picture is subjective, so if you do decide to pick up this laptop, know that you have a mix of presets that you can choose from to get the ideal picture for you. There's a color calibration tab here too, but for the purposes of this review I won't go into that here. If you guys would like me to dive into this a little bit more, please let me know in the comments. You can also create profiles if you want a unique setup, depending on the situation. For example, if I want to extend the battery life, I've created a profile that turns off panel overdrive, sets the fan mode to silent, and turns off the keyboard backlighting. I generally have the laptop plugged in, so this is the only one I really need. There are two 4-watt speakers with smart amp technology and two 2-watt tweeters. To a non-audiophile like me, I have no complaints with regards to the audio quality. If you're watching non-music content, the clarity of the audio is excellent, to my ears at least. Now this obviously depends on how good the audio design of the source is, so your mileage may vary. Higher quality YouTube content sounds great at 50% volume.
It's a power inverter, and that lets you power your entire home from your truck battery in the event of a power outage.
Pushing the volume to 100% does distort the audio a little bit. Nothing major though, so I'm still impressed.
Is made by Blackwing. The graphite inside is soft and makes beautiful dark lines. It's the perfect texture for someone like me who tends to sketch with...
Because the laptop supports Dolby Atmos, the audio will sound incredible. You can configure the audio profile using the Dolby Access app on Windows 10. In the app, you'll need to enable Dolby Atmos for built-in speakers from the product section. If you navigate to settings, you can change the sound profile. By default, it was set to music and the intelligent equalizer setting was unbalanced. I found that the voice profile muted the sound a little bit and it was more difficult to hear any background music if there was any in the video. It wasn't a major difference and was difficult to portray through video even with the mic in close vicinity to the speakers.
Okay results, but being visibly blurrier and less detailed than native, particularly around the sword and the pillar's trim. The quality preset is as low as you probably want to go for 1080p. It looks like 1440p's performance mode, which makes sense because like that mode, it's...
Audio clarity on the same 50% volume was greater on the music profile with the equalizer set to balanced. I couldn't really tell much of a difference between each of the three equalizer settings. Here is a video playing at 75% volume. In a second I'll switch between the three settings and you can make your own mind up.
For at least 4 or 5 years now. So
sure.
It's been available to consumers since when was BitLocker added? Was that with
2014 or something? I understand, or beyond. Like I understand there might be some security problems with the fact that my system's super ancient, but
so
I don't.
Here's what I think.
The game and movie profiles sounded identical to me when listening to or watching non-music content. Switching between both on the same content didn't produce a different audio profile, at least to me.
Over to a more powerful core, or vice versa, if the task doesn't require as many resources. It's kind of like what they do with the DMV, and I immediately lost interest.
For music, however, I found the movie preset to be the most accurate, as you can easily distinguish between the range of instruments being used. If I change over to the game preset, some of the sounds become a little muted or less obvious.
A song travels further than the singer who sang it. The sound of a church bell is not intended for the ears of the person who rang.
Everyone's ears are different and so their perception of sound will be different. For me, the movie preset was the best overall for all types of content. Forza Horizon 4 runs smashingly at 4K. I've never seen the frame rate dip below 40, which is perfect for a racing game. If you pay attention to the FPS while I talk about the performance, you'll see that the frames rarely drop below 50. The sudden drops ruin the immersion and I'm seeing none of that. Far Cry 5 at 4K with all of the settings maxed out runs at a steady 60 FPS with some dips here and there. The RTX 3080 in this laptop has a max TGP of 130 watts. The card is very powerful, however it's not the most powerful variant of the laptop RTX 3080, as some do have a total graphics power or TGP of 165 watts. Mafia Definitive Edition doesn't run as well as Far Cry 5, hovering between 40 and 55 FPS in this car chase scene. If you want even better performance than this at 4K with settings maxed out, the TGP is a very important metric. Look for the variant that has a TGP of 165 watts if you want the best of the best for gaming. Rise of the Tomb Raider is 5 years old now, and at 4K with the settings cranked all the way up, it still looks great. This opening sequence is a perfect example of how involved the scene can be. There are loads of particle and lighting effects here pushing the GPU to its limits. It still stays above 40 FPS on the more intense scenes. Admittedly, I haven't played an online shooter for years on PC, and so I'm very rusty. This is Warzone maxed out at 1440p. If you look at the top left side of the laptop screen, you can see the FPS hover between 70 and 85 FPS, which is fairly fantastic for a Twitch shooter. You can turn off some of the advanced graphic settings to get even better FPS. At 1080p you get a little bit of a boost in the average FPS, although it's not a massive difference. The FPS drops a little to around the 70 to 80 FPS mark when you're in a vehicle. Again, this is not bad as long as you don't get massive drops, which I didn't. DLSS was disabled for both of these tests. Black Ops Cold War runs very smoothly at 4K, again with all of the bells and whistles enabled. In this close quarter firefight I never saw the FPS dip below 60, resulting in a fantastic shooting experience. I have DLSS enabled in all of these tests as it effectively doubles the frame rate without compromising on the details, at least to my eyes. This is with DLSS turned off at 4K and at max settings. The frame rate is pretty much half of what I get with DLSS on, with no major visual difference. If you guys would like to see a dedicated video on DLSS performance, please comment below on which games you'd like me to test. Dropping to 1440p allows the frame rate to creep towards and sometimes exceed 100 FPS. Given that the refresh rate of the monitor is 120Hz, the gameplay feels buttery smooth. Dropping even further to 1080p, you get another boost in FPS, reaching the magical 120 FPS mark at times. The increase here isn't as significant as it is when going from 4K to 1440p, but an increase is an increase. Because of the size of the laptop screen, playing at 1080p doesn't look too bad. With it being such a fast-paced game, you won't really notice that much of a difference. I don't have an A7S III, but a viewer asked how the laptop handles 4K footage from that camera, both in terms of scrubbing and editing content in the video editor I use, Filmora Pro in this case, and how quick the export is. There were no issues scrubbing through the content. I'm using sample A7S III footage I downloaded. I record 4K on my Galaxy S10, which is not the same, but I thought it'd be useful to know I've never had an issue with scrubbing since switching to this laptop. I generally edit with proxies enabled for quality, as otherwise the footage isn't the best for color correction. If however I disable proxies altogether, I do get a few hiccups here and there. Even then, after a little while those hiccups disappear, as I believe Filmora Pro does do some form of caching still. I have a feeling it stores resources in RAM as the usage spikes if I have Filmora Pro open for a while. I may be wrong and this is just a memory leak that Wondershare needs to fix, who knows. Realistically, you would never edit without proxies if you want the most efficient workflow, making this a non-issue. Exporting a 3-minute video containing 4K 30fps content from the A7S III takes about 8 minutes to export in 4K, sometimes longer. This laptop will get very hot, there are no two ways about it. After gaming for a couple of hours, CPU temps hit a toasty 93 degrees Celsius, although that was only for a short while before the fans really kicked in. I blame the heat partly on the summer weather. During the rest of the session, temps were between 80 and 90 degrees Celsius, closer to 90 degrees the majority of the time. The CPU will shut down at 105 degrees Celsius to prevent overheating, so I was well within the operating range. According to this PC Gamer article, temperatures between 90 and 95 degrees Celsius are typical and by design, so I wouldn't be too worried. The fan profile was set to the preset of Turbo for all of my tests. I can go into manual mode in the Armory Create software to create a more aggressive fan profile if I find that the temps are a little too toasty. Holding and dragging the diamonds adjusts the curve. Running Cinebench R23 pushed the CPU to its limits, with the temperatures maxing out at 95 degrees Celsius. Just as a side note, the Cinebench score was a healthy 13,162 points, which is significantly better than the equivalent Intel 8-core 16-thread CPU. With the CPU at 95 degrees for a good 10 minutes, the keyboard side of the laptop wasn't hot to the touch and one could type comfortably. The bottom was understandably quite warm to the touch. The GPU temps hovered below the 85 degree mark, which I was more than impressed with. These are perfectly acceptable temperatures for a laptop with this much power. I found that the most aggressive manual fan profile with the fan set to 100% at 80 degrees provided better cooling, with the CPU temp staying below the 85 degrees Celsius mark. I still saw a high of 90 but never close to the 93 I saw using the turbo preset. This is a perfect segue onto the next section. With a lavalier mic connected to my shirt, this is what the fan noise is like on the manual preset with them running full tilt at 100%. The fan speed here reaches a max RPM of 6400. This is what the fans sound like on the turbo preset. In this mode, I never saw the fan speed exceed 5000 RPM, which explains the difference in noise. If you want the cooling performance to suffer a little bit for reduced noise, then I'd suggest using the turbo preset. There is a noticeable difference IRL, although you might not be able to tell through the medium of YouTube. Either way, I'd suggest using earphones or a headset when you're gaming. I'm really impressed with the laptop, and that's no surprise considering the price tag. In the UK, as of the publishing of this video, the version of the laptop I have is priced at £3,300. A bit of a tough pill to swallow, but considering how difficult it is to get a desktop 3080, the price isn't too bad in my opinion. In the US, it's priced at $3,700 and it appears to be out of stock, at least everywhere I've looked. Availability should be better than it is for the GPU market, although I wouldn't hold my breath. If you can find one and you can afford it, I can wholeheartedly recommend this as a desktop replacement. I've been using this for over 2 months and it's not skipped a beat. It ticks all of the boxes in all areas apart from the keyboard and trackpad. I purchased a laptop with the intention of using an external mouse and keyboard, so this is less of an issue for me. If your intention is to use this on the go, then make sure you use the wrist rest. I would still recommend at least getting a mouse, as the trackpad is awful to use. Other than those gripes, this is perfect as a gaming/workstation machine. The Screenpad Plus doesn't get used all that often, apart from acting as a place where I can monitor my CPU and GPU temps, as well as for audio recording/editing on Audacity. Apart from that, I don't use any software that makes use of the Screenpad Plus, so it's a bit of a waste for me. If you're one of the few who've reached this part of the video, I really appreciate you watching all the way through. I would love it if you'd leave a like and maybe subscribe if you want more content like this. Goodbye.